Hello, world, and welcome to the Innovation Coaching Podcast. My name is Klaus Hostel, and with me today, I have David Bassick. David, tell me how I can help.
Hey, Klaus. Oh, lots of things, lots of questions I have about how I am emerging into a consultant, creator, not as hinged or connected to a university, although I still am a university professor, which carries a lot more weight, I've discovered, in Europe than it does in the US. Even in the performance that I just directed here in Dublin, the producer insisted on listing me as Professor David Bassick, and I just thought, why? But evidently, as he put it, if he had professor, he would use it constantly. So I've heard this from a number of Europeans. So there it is. So I am a college professor, guilty as charged. I am finding that the work that I'm doing in both emerging storytelling methodologies from theater and film to interactive media and even moving into metaverse narratives really require me to rethink my, I think as you put it in an earlier conversation, my brand. I'm teaching courses in world building. I'm teaching courses in innovation in future storytelling. Teaching future casting and thinking of narrative as a research tool for people to not only see where they are, but where they could be going using collaborative processes, using co-creation, and building teams rather than solo leadership models. So my question for you, to stay on topic, is where could I find the greatest impact in promoting myself, marketing myself, introducing myself into fields that are not only artistic and educational, but beyond, into business and into government?
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. So I think, and we've talked about this before,
Mm-hmm.
but here, so to those listening, this is a continuation of an ongoing conversation, but we'll try to make it seem like a fresh one. But if any of us says, "Oh yeah, you said that before," that there's a reason for that. One of the things that we've talked about before, but I think is worth mentioning again, is that when people sell something, whether they're trying to sell an idea or they're trying to sell a product or a service, it's very, very tempting to try to be as broad as possible because you know all this stuff, right? I would like to sell how to be an entrepreneur or sell
Mm-hmm.
narrative transformations in modern theater, which is still more specific, but that could still cover a lot of ground. When people are trying to buy, though, whether they're students or they're trying to buy something for their wife's 60th birthday, or they're just trying to buy something for their sales team, whatever it is, they generally want it to be very, 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 very specific. Then it's not, I don't want sales training. I want, how do I teach the underperformers on my sales team to get better at that closing the sale without getting nervous about initiating the sales closing?
Mm-hmm.
They're great at openers. They're great at describing the product. They understand what's going on. They're great at listening. But when it comes to, so do you want it or not, they stumble. How do I make them better at that?
Mm-hmm.
And then if the person, that's the person buying, right? That's somebody sitting out there with a specific problem somewhere in the world, Sao Paulo, Singapore, Sydney, San Francisco, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanism is the same. They have a very specific problem they want to solve. And then out there, then they go hunting for that. And it's rare to find how to take your excellent sales team and get them to be even better at initiating the do you want it or not conversation done by Patricia, who's done 20 years of sales and has helped 1,000 customers do exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, they find things like how do you close, or even they buy sales training because they hope it's part of it, right? So part of this is recognizing how do you figure out exactly what need are you trying to solve or what dream are you trying to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes somebody comes up with this, they manage to hit something that is both deep and broad. right? One of the lovely examples I mentioned often because I think this guy was brilliant. It's a public speaker trainer. I've never met him. I've just heard about him from a Dutch company, ASML, that I worked with. And they do all sorts of trainings, and they've gotten tons of people from all sorts of different industries to do different trainings. But I heard about this guy who'd run a workshop called How to Learn to Speak Like Barack Obama. And that had apparently the guy had been good and people had been happy. And then some others said, hey, we want that as well. And he'd ended up doing this training, this workshop piece over and over and over and over again for thousands and thousands of people because it was clear. It wasn't how to do public speaking training. It wasn't how to do body language or how to use humor or how to be effective or how to use large words without seeming like an asshole. It wasn't all these things. It was how to do public speaking like Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And people then who sell that immediately thought, I want that or I don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the thing. You know so much, David, that you're a high risk candidate for just David teaches life. Because there's a lot of life, there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of experience, and it's multifaceted.
Yeah.
And it's theoretical, and it's academic, and it's professional, and it's business, and it's China, and it's Europe, and it's US, and it's you could theoretically walk into many rooms and then say, David, here's what we want. Do you do that? And you say, sure, I do. And you would be right. Now, that's fine when you walk in the room where they want you, but that's a huge risk when you're trying to find out who do you tell the world you are, because you are so many different things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the challenge that I'm finding is that, especially after, at the end of, I've been on, as you know, I've been on sabbatical from the US for now 18 months. And in those 18 months, there's been very little relaxation. It's been a lot of work from Iraq to Austria to workshops in Eastern Europe and in each of these places. So if I listen geographically, that's one thing. I've started to do an index of what topics that I've been either teaching, asked to work on, where I've met needs and addressed questions in, I think, useful ways, whether it's, people at Lego or people, in Zapka in Poland. In various places, I have been able to sort of pivot to the core questions, which has left me with, as you're describing, a very broad shelf of potential content. So broad an inventory. I mean, it's not IKEA inventory. It's not huge, but it's broad enough for me to look at the shelf or shelves and say, which persona do I want to promote in what marketplace? And how do I get seen and noticed in it? And I think it's not only just because of my broad interest. I think it's because of this moment that we're in, where we are, I think, at this unique juncture where experience design, creative technology, future of storytelling, the evolution of international business models are all asking sort of crisis-oriented questions about future, and the lack of a way to sort of string together a plan that includes everything but doesn't fall apart because of its broad width. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And that leads to the second part. This is the supermarket is a brilliant analogy, right? Because if you're going to the supermarket and you want to buy pasta sauce, then you try to find out where are the sauces. Okay, here are the sauces. Here's like something for an Indian dish and something for a Mexican dish. Oh, there are the pasta sauces. Amongst the pasta sauces, where are the brands that I want and what are the different types of sauce I want? And there are many ways to organize this. Right? If you're running a supermarket, you can organize it by brand. You can organize it so all of the craft sauces are here, and the what are they called? We'll just make up some names for the fun of it. The Sanini sauces are here, or you could make it up by specific sauce. So here are all the chunky tomato sauces. Here are all the white cheese sauces, etc. And then they are different brands, and different marketplaces organize things in different places. But if you're trying to sell your pasta sauce, and you're stuck over with the toilet paper, then you might have somebody who's looking for toilet paper thinking, wow, here's pasta sauce. I need that as well. I just wasn't thinking of it, but now I see it. I want it. But most of them are probably going to think that's mislabeled or that doesn't belong here, or they're just not going to notice because they're looking for toilet paper.
That's right.
And when we go to supermarkets, we all have insane amounts of experience, especially as we get older, with going to a supermarket. And we see so many different market layouts and so many different ways of doing it. But there are some industry standards of how you organize your supermarket. It's very rare to come into a supermarket where it says, here we have organized products by color coding. These are the blue products and these are the red products. That's most people would say, what? That is okay, that's weird. Interesting, but weird.
Right.
And that means most of us know roughly, if we're in a foreign supermarket in a foreign place, we know roughly how to get around. And yet still, even a supermarket in our own language, in our own countries, in our own spaces we're familiar with, is going to be different. Right? You're in Dublin right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that when you went to the supermarket the first time, you had some, oh, this is totally normal, and some moments of this makes no sense whatsoever, and probably also some moments of why don't they do this where I normally live?
Yesterday, in fact, yesterday. So I'm looking for plant-based yogurt, and it's not with the yogurt. It's not with the organic food. I find it somewhere with the Coke Zero. But why? But there's a vernacular or a kind of semantic definition that eludes me. That if I stayed long enough, I'd probably catch hold to. It might be part of the sense of humor. It might be, I don't know, like you would need to discover the mind of various supermarket managers to understand it.
And there you have it in a nutshell, because that means that you're the guy producing the plant-based yogurt. And you've got your beautiful plant-based yogurt. Oh, by the way, you also have 50 other products that you're considering. But let's say you've settled on just the plant-based yogurt. And now you're trying to figure out, how do I sell the thing? Well, you can just stand on a street corner yelling plant-based yogurt, but that's probably going to be rather ineffective.
Yeah.
It might work if it's a traffic street. It might work if it's a busy place. You might do it at a train station, but it's probably going to be tricky. So you find somebody to help you, find somebody with a platform. Let's say the platform is LinkedIn, or the platform is Skillshare, or the platform is some sort of Facebook group, or the platform is a university, right? You find some marketplace, some supermarket in our analogy, and say, hey, I've got this plant-based yogurt. Can you help me sell it? Say, great. We'll take some of the profit, or we'll add cost to it on top of it, but we'll help you with this. And you're great. Okay, so now you pay me? No. We don't trust you yet, so we're not just ordering a lot of plant-based yogurt. You're on commission here, Mr. Plant-based Yogurt guy. So we'll take in some of what you have, we'll give it some shelf space, and we'll see if it sells, and if it sells, you'll get some money. Okay, fair enough. You're willing to take that chance. You're lucky that probably the plant-based yogurt you're selling is a lot of your mind, so it means it doesn't cost you anything if nobody's buying, right? You don't have to go out and spend $100,000 on actually producing 10,000 plant-based yogurt cups. It's what's in your head, and if somebody buys it, you serve it, and if not, then no.
Right.
But if you have no idea how that supermarket works, and they don't really understand what you're doing, or maybe worse, it's automated, then if you're selling to the Irish, obviously the plant-based yogurt is sold by being next to the Coke Zero. And if you're selling to the Americans, then they're going to look for it with the organic foods, because apparently that's a thing. Or except 10 years ago it was a thing. Now it's just with food, or they're going to be with the yogurts, or they're going to be with the dairy, or they're going to be with you see where this is going, right?
Yeah.
And this is supermarkets. This is something where we shop not daily, but very often. We have tons of experience. It's super established. There's done a million experience been done. There's big players, blah, blah, blah. Now, let's say you're selling something slightly more undefined, narrative training, whatever the hell that means, right? Even when people see it, they're standing there in the store, they don't really know what's in it. It's not plant-based yogurt. It's papaya experience. Like, I don't know what this is, but maybe I want it.
Thinking about your quotation of the company that you used, learn to speak like Barack Obama. That challenge or that invitation supersedes category
Yes.
because it lands on a very specific addressing of a specific need, albeit, there might be a political dimension as to why they wouldn't want to be, or they may find Obama too slow a speaker. Even myself, when I listened to his podcast with Bruce Springsteen, I put it on 1.25. It's just a little slow for me. So, insofar as I could reshape, blow uh, the packing off of some of the workshop titles that I have and get to a core, do this and you will get the following, a deliverable. Right. I think that's a really good idea. And I think if to take it back to the plant-based yogurt, and while you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I now know why they had it next to the Coke Zero.
Uh-huh.
It's because they saw uh, the person who would not want the excess calories, and that was the rationale. So maybe, and if I see that as a trend in Dublin, I'll see that that is how they see perhaps other organic foods or foods that appear to be healthful. Not that Coke Zero is very healthful, but that doesn't mean its marketing isn't about not sugar, right? Whereas it has other things which will kill you, of course. But like the plant-based yogurt, which is to me in a category that belongs with other foods, or at least vegetarian or vegan foods, that category is something that I'm bringing that's not local. And understanding the local in many ways could translate to, if I'm working to propose something to a government agency or propose something to a corporate, I would have to sort of understand the lingua franca of how they think so that I could crack open an email that might, be responded to.
Yes, exactly. And then if we add to that, there's also the element, and this is a story I got from a talk some years ago, so I haven't fact checked this. So if somebody's out there listening and thinking, yeah, that's a story, it's not true, then forgive me. It serves its purpose, even if I haven't personally fact checked it. And it's about Bentley. And about Bentley, which is one of these luxury car brands, really, really high-end
Right.
car brand. And they were finding it troublesome to when they went to car shows, people would look, but they wouldn't buy
Mm.
because it was seen as a little bit too expensive. And then somebody there thought, okay, let's try it differently. Let's go to boat shows. Because suddenly now, if you're shopping for cars, then the Bentley is like, that is the top of the line, high-end item, etc. Where if you're at a boat show and you're looking at a yacht that's 50 million, then a Bentley's like, oh, let's get one of these for fun since we can't afford a boat. Please, Jacques, let's do that. Oh, sure, it's just a couple of million for a Bentley, right? It's a very different thing. Where are you positioning yourself? Are you the expensive item in the cheap supermarket? Are you the cheap item in the expensive supermarket? Or where are you? That also adds to it, right?
Right.
Is your 7 pounds per cup yogurt, is that sold in the cheap place as this is for the high-end consumer who shops here anyway? Or is it sold as this is the reasonable alternative somewhere else? Or is this like the cheap stuff we use to sell our more expensive stuff in some really high-end place? This is also a factor.
I want to pivot to a secondary question, but it actually undergirds the first. So, as a theater professor, I think that one of the things I see in graduating students is that they are far too specialized, so that they only understand acting, or they only understand design, or they only understand playwriting, or they've specialized, and this is what universities have done. It's partially to say that they are preparing students more fully for an actual career. That's the wrapper. But it's also much more fun for the faculty member to teach only the thing that they have specialization in as well. I think it's a fail because the students who don't come out with a more general education don't know how to be flexible and pivot to different types of employers, different types of opportunities. So the generalist, which is pretty much like saying the dilettante in university settings, is actually the more robust plan. So, with having said that, I look at this new iteration of myself into this next phase where I'm no longer the professor of theater arts or the professor of acting, but I'm actually proposing that I am actually more than that. Because, in fact, since I stepped down as Dean of Theater and Film back in 2007, I've been exploring, as you know, a much broader curriculum. And I say broader in the true sense, in that it has, leapt from theater directing to transmedia storytelling to game design to immersive spatial narrative to now Web3 blockchain and metaverse strategies, as well as looking at the relationship of all of these narrative structures inside of new technologies as they're emerging. And my work this last year in Austria at the School of Applied Science, University of Applied Science in Austria, has really given me a much broader and not shallow, a broad yet profound understanding of where different fields are connecting. So now I look at a marketplace filled with specialists, filled with people competing, perhaps for the positions and consulting that I could much more usefully address from this broader but profound perspective. And the competition, I don't know that anyone really has competition. We have other people in our field or adjacent fields looking for similar types of employment or gigs. I'm trying to find a more effective way to propose why me, not this specialist in this new technology or this person who's done research in this very specific field. Because while they are terrific, perhaps, if that's exactly what you want, they're showing up in places that I would much better serve because I would understand a broader human need for connection, co-creation, narrative, and looking forward to next generational adoption.
So that, and I love that. And that leads us to one of the other factors here is who is it that you want to help? And by that, there is a very fundamental question to ask, right? Often when people talk about, oh, am I good enough and do I know enough? And the reality is you just need to know more than the people you serve, but it's also tricky if you know too much, right? Do you follow the NFL, for example?
No, I don't.
No. Give me a sport you like.
Tennis, probably.
Tennis, excellent. Okay, tennis. Who's a big tennis star that you know? You can say somebody from the 80s. It's okay if you say John McEnroe.
Yeah, no, not John. What's it? Nadal, yeah.
Yes. So
Okay.
Nadal is a hotshot tennis player, really top of the line, one of the best in the world. And Nadal, since I don't follow, is Nadal a male or a female tennis player?
A male.
A male tennis player. Okay. So not sure. I remembered the name, but I wasn't able to play. So Nadal has probably a couple of people helping him get better at what he does. There's probably some guy who helps him with physical training. There's somebody who helps with the backswing. There's somebody who helps with court positioning. There's somebody who helps with the serve, etc. I'm pretty sure that if you are the guy who's helping Nadal with serving, right, with doing the opening of the tennis where you whack the ball over the net and the other opponent has to catch it or it's over already. That person is probably really, 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 really good at serving or understands what is needed, the muscle movements, the psychology, the choices, all this sort of thing.
Right.
Do you think that person is the same person who is Nadal's running coach?
No, of course not.
Is it the same person who's Nadal's dietitian? No, of course not. It's probably not even the same person who helped Nadal with his backhand. It might be, but it's probably not. So we have some people, so somebody here, you're so specialized that you're not even going to get the help the backhand position, or you're definitely not going to help the physical training position, even though you probably are good at that. Now, the next part of that is, let's say that that person instead went to coach 7-year-olds in tennis, right? If you're coaching 7-year-olds in tennis, you don't have a separate serving coach. Usually not. Usually 7-year-olds they're all over the place. They love the game. They're trying to figure it out. So there's a little bit of physical, a little bit of where do you place, a little bit of understand the rules, a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Right.
So to teach 7-year-olds tennis, you need to be pretty damn generalist, because there isn't a special serving coach and there isn't an offensive coordinator and there isn't a backhand coach. Nadal probably has these things. And that means that there, the generalist is very, very needed. And then let's take it a step further and say, okay, so we now have this brilliant generalist. The Nadal's backhand guy, he's out. He's not being allowed to teach 7-year-olds because he's not really good at it. Also, he doesn't know how to communicate with them because he's used to coaching top level athletes like Nadal and shouting at a 7-year-old going, don't you want this?
Right.
Do you want Wimbledon or nothing, is going to leave them in tears, not lead them to performance. And that means that this person is probably not good at both.
Right.
So somebody else who's 23, who loves tennis, is good with kids, is going to be much better at teaching those youngsters than Nadal's backhand swing guy. Add to that, this person's going to be terrible in Germany because they don't speak German.
Right.
So you could be 15 years old, you could have no idea what you're doing, you could be pretty useless at tennis, but you would at least have a tennis racket, and you'd still be a better coach than this 23-year-old star kids coach for the 7-year-olds, because you speak German and he doesn't. So even if you're bad, you at least speak a language they understand. And this 23-year-old is going to be much better than Nadal's star backhand coach because he's a generalist and the backhand coach is a specialist. And you see where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
That if you're teaching, if you're a generalist, then you are probably going to be hitting people who are at a level where they want generalists. If you, as a theater professor, right, you didn't even call yourself a theater professor, you called yourself a professor of acting, right, at one point.
Mm-hmm.
What was the formal title when you were a dean?
Professor of theater arts and film. Yeah. I mean, I was dean of the Conservatory of Theater Arts and Film, and I had a corollary appointment as a full professor with tenure as the professor of theater arts. Yeah.
Bingo. Imagine somebody coming there and saying, hey, I'd like to make sure that you guys know more about your field than you do now. Not getting better at meetings or getting better at administration or getting better at TV commercials or whatever stuff you might feel, yeah, we could use Yelp. But say, hey, David, I'm here to help you get better at the core of what you do. And you're like, okay, I like that. What do you know? Who are you? Said, well, I'm a guy who likes theater. You're like, yeah, I think probably we'll need a bit more than that, right? Because you are at that point in your field about as high on the specialization chain as it gets. So somebody who's supposed to teach you is going to be even higher up. But if you get somebody coming in and say, hey, David, I teach university professors how to get in exercise during the day and staying in shape while still teaching, right? Then I don't need to be Nadal's backhand guy. Then I can probably get by with being some 23-year-old student who's been in classes and noticed that the professors who are in good shape are the ones who walk around while teaching, and the ones who are not are the ones who stand still while teaching.
I want to suggest that there's a person, and I don't know this, but I'm going to suppose, and therefore it shall be true, that there is a person who is in between Nadal and all of his specialists, who reviews the team of specialists for Nadal and actually says, you need to sack the lot of them, or you need to replace this guy. So there's a kind of a sage, wise person who comes in, and she or he makes recommendations to bring Nadal past a certain, to use a tennis term, set point of accomplishment to the next point. Now, that person isn't necessarily a specialist, but has a more global understanding of the emerging challenges of, let's say, playing younger tennis players because of the way that they are being taught, or the ways in which the climate is changing, the time of day that you're playing, and how to manage that. Like, I'm trying to think all of the future evolving emerging factors that should be not part of sort of an old tried and true way, but an evolved next and better way. So that person might be Nadal himself, but it also is more likely that to get that advice, one would have to reach out to someone who isn't sort of lost in the tall, reeds and plants, like someone who can have a more drone view of the emerging landscape.
Definitely.
And that's where I would position myself.
Yes, and I think that's true. From a positioning standpoint, I think that's true. That those people who know enough about a broad range of subjects to be able to command or to coordinate or to guide without being the specialist, right? That on a classic European football team, that's the coach, right? The coach needs to understand what a goalkeeper does. Doesn't need to be the best goalkeeper, doesn't even need to be the best goalkeeper coach, but a coach needs to understand how the goalkeeper plays. It needs to understand player motivation, needs to understand something about physicality, needs to understand all these sorts of things while also dealing with the board and the fans and contracts and all these sorts of things. To be a coach for an A-level football team is an insane job because you need to be very high level at like 30 different things and medium level at 50 more. And there's the things you at least need to know what are.
Right.
And the problem with that is that while that's true, that's probably you. Not as necessarily a football coach, but where you are, you could probably fit that description and that level and that broad but deep thinking in quite a few places. Now, here's the tricky question. You don't really follow European football, right? But you do know there's something like Manchester United and Barcelona FC.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Do you think there are more people looking for the job of head coach at Manchester United than there are positions as head coach of Manchester United?
Oh, of course.
Yes. And the tricky part is, so even if you're right, and I think you are, then is how the hell do we make these people understand that you're a good choice for that when, just as with these head coaches, they are starved, or not starved, they are saturated with choice.
Right.
If you go out and look for the next head coach to coach Manchester United, then you're going to have everybody who's going to be top candidates is going to be brilliant. And the people who are going to be the candidate number 64 on your short list, which is rather long, is also going to be brilliant. And before you get into the even slightly less brilliant, but still great, you're going to be far down that list in some areas and not so much in others. And that means that the more you take that position, right, where it's simple, there's one team captain, there's one coach, there's plenty of midfielders. A US NFL team is 55 players. It's got one head coach. And that means that there is a better chance, statistically speaking, of becoming one of the field players than of becoming the head coach, because there's simply more to go around. So the tricky thing is that where you've done a lot of work in spaces where there was not that many spaces, university professors, that's a rare beast indeed, Mr. Besser, a rare beast. But now you're saying, yeah, but I want this, I'm now looking for this sort of position, which is probably just as rare, if not rarer. The difference is that you fought your way up through that university system, and now you're trying to figure out where the hell even are these jobs? Do I want them? Do I want to create them? And I think part of the tricky thing there is that where the university system has been around for quite a few years, and there's a path there. People can follow the path. There are variations to the path. There are different nuances to it. There's still a path. It's rare that you go university, bachelor's degree, go out, play tennis for 6 years, and suddenly you're a full professor at Harvard. It's rare.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not even possible. where when it comes to something like being a creative strategist or being that the coordinator of the circus, the path is unclear. The definitions are unclear. The people you measure yourself against are unclear. The rules are being changed all the time. Nobody knows what the hell is going on. And here you are saying, I'm David. I fit this perfectly. And then they're saying, great, I've got a meeting. And by the way, what is this? And who are you? And we've already got somebody. And oh, so you're a user experience designer. You do computers. Like, no, no, let's take it from the top, right? And that means it's a very different game.
Yeah.
And therefore, the generalist is a hard sell to the very experienced, even though what you're saying is true, where the generalist is an easier sell to coach the kids because there's plenty of kids team that needs coaching and there are not that many Manchester Uniteds.
Right. Right. I mean, so from what you're saying, the natural fit is to slide into consulting with academic institutions and university settings, which are by and large fairly closed. They're not they're not closed. They're enclosed. They keep closed with locks, and the reason they keep closed with locks is because they're protecting questions that can lead to the dissolving of academic programs and the reduction of faculty in fields that are needing to be protected, right? So rather than future thinking and seeing the purposes of these academic institutions as fomenting a next generation of creators and thinkers who are fit and suited with a flexible and powerful imagination to encounter what they will find in the remainder of this 21st century. Instead, they have come into a kind of sort of loop where the past is performing to be a preparation for the future, and it is not. So to go in and try to jump into that field of protection is punishing, right? It's punishing at one university. It will be, multiply punishing to try to do that at other universities. So that being said, my thinking has been recently to form a kind of institute or academy, another model of education, which also could have its future. This is something I know we've talked about because I've seen you as a peer and a fellow in this area. But I think that's got to be the model, because the other one, you become you're disabled from action as you enter the field. You have to disarm, as it were. And once you've disarmed with not talking about X or not talking about Y and not talking about jobs and not talking about future, not talking about entrepreneurism, because somehow that's not what we do in an academic institution, albeit any parent, any young student coming into a school, that's actually the promise. Somewhere along the 4 years, it becomes country club for young people and a sort of, drop into the abyss after graduation. And most universities are terrible at, what would be the 5, 6, and 7 year post the 4 year education. And it's really not much different in Europe, I've discovered. Like I was thinking somehow, I think we talked about once, like Europe might be the panacea and have solved this. They haven't. They have done one thing more effectively, generally, is the fact that you have universities of applied sciences rather than only universities. In the US, we merged the two and confused the whole thing into one very confused bundle. But there are issues here as well. But at least the vocationally oriented university is a step way beyond where most universities are, especially in the US. But I think, that being said, I feel like I know that area enough to say, with the time that I'm looking at in the next 10 years, what's going to be emerging, I'd rather be part of working with people in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, as a this core group than looking at the 17 to 22-year-old group, because I think solving their issues outside of a university, that will seem more risky to them. Whereas after they've come out of one of these universities,
Hmm.
they are much more they are thirstier than they were when they went in. And that's, I think, an opportunity. That's a business opportunity for an academy.
Definitely a business opportunity. And I think you also, there's something here that's relevant, which is if you go places where people are like you, you'll know your way around and people will know you, but you're going to fit in, and that's not easy. Right? I have a friend who used to work at Lego in like a high level innovation position.
Mm-hmm.
And he said when he was at Lego, he could go anywhere in Silicon Valley and he could call them and say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm this guy. I'm from Lego. This is my title. Does anybody have time to meet me in an hour?" And they would open their doors and say yes. In Denmark, Lego's close, right? Lego's like, sure, you're a hotshot from Lego. That's cool. But there's a chance that there are others, right? It's not exotic because it's Danish.
Mm-hmm.
In Billund, the city that is basically Lego employees, if you say to somebody there, "So I work at Lego," they don't go, "Oh, cool." They go, "What are you trying to tell me? Like, there's 8,000 people here, 5,000 of them work for Lego. Of course you work for Lego. Like, so do I. So does my sister. So does my cousin, and so do 8 of my friends. Like, what are you trying to tell me?" Where in Silicon Valley, working for Lego had been this, ooh, right? And you said it yourself. You said that the professor title carries more gravitas in Europe than it does in the US in your experience. And part of if you're trying to figure out, okay, what the hell am I doing? There is a balance somewhere. On one hand, going to a space where you know your way around, right? You know the university space like crazy, but you also know it's hard as hell. And if you go in and say, "Well, I'm professor this and this," they'll say, "Yeah, great, so am I." Or why does that matter to me?
Mm-hmm.
Where if you go into a place where it's these university dropouts who really wanted to have finished, but they really respect it, and you say, my business card says former dean and professor, they're like, "Ooh, this guy knows life," just because of that. Right? It's as the guy you talked with said, if I'd had a professor title, I'd throw it around all the time. I often joke with people and said, have you heard me talk about my PhD? And they always go, "No, I didn't know you had a PhD." It's because I don't have one. If I had one, I'd mention it all the bloody time. But I don't, so I don't use that. Where if you're trying to get a foot in the door, one, the Barack Obama trick has the advantage that it goes beyond category because it's so specific. It gets to this "do I want it or not" moment. It's not a category, it's a "do I want this or not." Number two is if you go in spaces where you know what's going on and you fit those rules, then you're going to feel at home, but you're also going to be in a very red ocean. If you go to spaces where you don't know the rules, then have to figure out the marketplaces and figure out the thinking and figure out, oh, here are actually the yogurt goes next to the Coke Zero. Oh, that makes sense for this market.
Right.
Now I understand that. Oh, now I get how to position myself, which can be pretty frustrating until you crack that nut and until you find out, and it's hard. But once you do, then you're in a space where you understand what's going on. And the last thing is that if you are in a space where everybody respects your gravitas or your standout capability, then that's going to be a lot easier than a place where everybody looks like you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one thing that comes out of what you just said, though, maybe gives me an answer that I was thinking wasn't the right answer. So the thing I have noticed is that what's on the shelf is diverse, and the possible shoppers are different from each other. And I have been practicing placing, to keep the metaphor of the market going, I have been practicing placing the various products, the various forms of plant-based yogurt, if you would, in different parts of the store to catch attention in different ways. And I've been thinking that that was building redundancy of activity on my part, but actually it's probably the right thing to do, because you wouldn't put the plant-based yogurt in Dublin in the same place as you would in Salzburg, Austria, or in Oslo, or in Copenhagen. Like, you would have to sort of figure out what is, I've been using this metaphor with a person I'm developing a workshop here in Belfast. I'm not in Belfast now, but I just was. Of like, what is the chassis and what are the wheels? Like, the wheels have to deal with the actual terrain that you're in, but the chassis could be the same.
Mhm.
Like, you don't want to be replacing the axles every time you show up. So there would be some part fixed and some part flexible. And that's not that's not familiar, because that's not the way the universities have formed my expectations. But it is actually part of transitioning, I think, from what I'm getting from our conversation, part of transitioning from being an expert within a container like a university to being an expert who is on the move, trying to pick up attention, contracts, engagement, consultations, and gigs of various kinds. I think it's actually part of the plan, part of the MOS, right? You know, of being this, rather than just imagining it.
Definitely, definitely. And it's also this, one of the nice things about the world we live in is that it is crazy complex and connected. And the fact that you can go to different places and do different things and have like a pretty global outlook and a pretty global sphere. And you have gigs like the last year you've spent in Europe doing things here and there and everywhere. And you still have plenty of connections back home. And if you decided to uproot and go to China, you'd have a career there.
Right.
The downside of that is that everything is complex and connected and fluid and moving. And it's no longer like I am a blacksmith. Boom, done, figured.
Yeah.
It's good. I shoe horses, right? It's crazy, and that's nice, but it's also tricky. And sometimes that means that placing that yogurt around many places is going to reveal that, oh, wait a minute, right? When the Apple, when they launched their personal computer, we know it now as a Mac. I'm using one right now, right? When that came out, their original plan, as far as I've been able to read, is they wanted it to be a kind of, shall we say, a word processor and an Excel machine and that sort of business machine.
Yeah.
And then they found out, okay, well, people, that's not who likes it. It's the people who want the graphic interface. And it's more of a creative thing. And they're like, okay, well, let's go with the flow. Now we're a creative thing. But you weren't that a year ago. Yeah, but now we are.
Right.
And the only way to find out that is by placing the yogurt in different spaces and find out, okay, what the hell is it?
Yeah.
But the first thing there is you need to actually put some yogurt in a can and put it somewhere.
That's right.
Because if you just stand in the street and say, hey, what do you need? It's much easier selling the yogurt on the street than just saying, hey, what do you need?
Right. And the thing about the yogurt metaphor, where it breaks down, is because I'm the yogurt.
Yes, that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, it's also
an advantage, but it's a problem when it's you going out.
it's a problem when you're confused about the fact that your yogurt has to live in, for example, different temperatures. So my graphic explanation of that is back in May, June of 23. It's before the Fulbright grant, which had me in Austria from February through beginning of July. I had Joseph brought me in to FH Salzburg to do two courses, one in narrative methodology and the other one in game studies and design. So that's during the day with the Austrian students. It's my first exposure to them, the program. In the evenings, I'm teaching a 8-week online course in Iraq for storytellers who are not only preparing to do in-person games to build attention on climate issues, leading to a hackathon, but also developing an online simulation game where we use Discord and Web3 spatial design. And I'm doing all of this in those 2 months. And I'm having to either show up as the teacher bringing an artistic perspective to the creative technology students in Austria, creating actual interaction, experience, real world stuff for the folks in Iraq, and with the other group in Iraq, actually having them design spatially. And it's all me, right? It's still this container of yogurt, but its application, its use, what rises to the top, so to speak, and sits at the bottom, all has to be modulated and calculated so that I don't show up as the wrong person at the wrong moment. And that's the difference. I mean, I think, if you teach a group of courses at a university, you're showing up with various syllabi, different content you're addressing. But what I'm seeing now is part of this, what this transition actually feels like is it's not the curriculum that's changing, although it is. It's the way I interact with people and the way I set goals with them are different. And since I adopted teaching very much with AI, I'm seeing this larger shift in the yogurt and also in the application of the tools that I'm teaching.
And that's tricky. And there's also, I wrote many years ago, I wrote a blog post where I said, sometimes I wish we sold physical products, because then we were selling role-playing events. And our problem was we could do anything.
Yeah.
Right? Within our space, we could do anything. And sometimes it was just something nice about selling a shoe. You've got the shoe, you've got it. Maybe it's in different colors, maybe it's in different sizes, there's different sizes, but it's still the shoe. And when somebody says, could the shoe be a bike? You don't say, yeah, of course it could be a bike, because it's a shoe. And if you're trying to find people to buy your shoe, you're not going to be sidetracked by people who are looking for a cruise liner.
Right.
Or people who are looking for a weekend pass at Disney, and could you maybe find it at 10% discount, because you're selling the shoe. We're being this super flexible thing that is David is tricky, because you are so amorphous and you can be many things to many people at many times.
Right.
And if I know you're good enough that if I hire you to do a thing and say, David, you're going to do a 45-minute talk on storytelling as a way of changing the world, here's your audience. You say, great, I look forward to that. It's going to be good. And then just before I announce you on stage, I say, sorry, David, I messed up. I mixed you up. You're actually going to be talking about how to succeed in an academic career without becoming boring. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, oh yeah, okay, cool. I've got it. Don't worry.
Yeah.
No problem. Gotcha. And then you're going to go on stage and you're going to be brilliant. And nobody in that audience will know that 2 minutes before you thought you were going to be talking about something different.
Yeah.
The shoe does not do that. The shoe does not suddenly become a bike. But that's also tricky, because when you're trying to sell the thing, the fact that what you're trying to sell can morph all the time. It's very hard to hold it in your hands, because it's so changeable. And that means whenever you're trying to say, hey, buy the shoe, and how do we find the people who want the shoe? At least you're trying to find you're looking for the shoe people.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, how do we sell anything to anyone, anywhere, anyhow, which is rather exhausting.
Yeah. The thing about, what you're saying is, I mean, I would actually teach that flexibility when I'm teaching or consulting on transmedia extension building. So you're building from one medium to another, always holding the intention. This is one of the things I took from our earlier conversation in person in Copenhagen, when you insisted that world building is brand building and brand building is world building.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I have in my expertise to teach and to do. Was after that conversation, I reformatted a course that I'd been asked to teach in Austria called Innovation. And it was very unclear what they thought innovation I was supposed to be teaching. So I took up the reins of the world building as brand building. And I had them essentially do a very extensive transmedia experiment. It was partly teaching, partly research for me. I had them create a 1-week retreat with 16 profiles of actual intended audience members or participants. And their goal was to take them on this 7-day retreat using every hour of the day to build a change in attitude, behavior, philosophy, ideology. They could choose what that was, but they needed to use 7 days to do it. When they accomplished that and presented that in groups of 7, I said, all right, now, since you already know your brand, now build the same thing, continue that through 15 different mediums. And I gave them a choice of 25 different mediums, from board games to theater to novels to television series. And then once they'd done that, thinking they were done, but there were weeks left in the semester, I said, okay, now I want you to iterate this into an experience design that happens in Web3 using blockchain, NFTs, build a community that actually can expand all from the info. So experience design transmedia into metaverse strategy in one group, which proved essentially world building is brand building, brand building is world building.
Bingo. And that thing, like, let's say you have that course or that program called World Building's Brand Building. Like, how long was it?
7 class meetings, an hour and 45 minutes each. Yeah.
Got it. So you could do that, and you could say this is either something that happens over the course of 7 weeks, and you do 2 hours each week, or it could be like an intense 3 days, and then you have a shoe.
Right.
And you have a shoe that you know is nice, right? It's a yogurt. It's the yogurt shoe in this case. And then you go out and say, hey, I got this yogurt shoe. It's called World Building's Brand Building. The form it takes is a 3-day hyper intense thing. It comes in 2 formats. One is 3-day hyper intense physical. The other is 7 weeks of online once a week training in groups. And here's how it works. This is the price. Here's for, and suddenly people can say, I want that, or I don't want it, because suddenly to them it's clear, right? And that getting to that place where people can decide yes or no, that's pretty hard when there's so many things you can do, because you could have taken that course anywhere, right?
That's right.
That innovation course, you could have done anything with, but I think it's a beautiful example of both using your incredible generalist skill set, but also at weaving something that ends up being public speaking, like Barack, specific, right?
Yeah, and very, very specific. And there's a takeaway where, I mean, the students, so I had enough students to have 3 complete universes built, but it didn't have to be students of creative technology, coming from film, animation, game design. It could be, there's a similar version of that, a shorter version of it that I taught in Milan at the Mion Institute for Arts and Technology. There's certainly ones like that I could do with businesses. I mean, but I think you're right. I mean, if it's world building as brand building, to quote you, it's then also has to be some in space acknowledgement. Then actually it is kind of clear, because both those words, world building and brand building, are important to people, but not usually conjoined. And speaking like Barack Obama is very specific, but also makes you think about how poorly we show up to speak compared to the former president.
Bingo. Now, David, we are getting to the wrap-up phase, even though we could easily, the two of us, continue the hours.
Yeah, we will. We will at some point in this format. Yeah.
But it won't be on this particular episode of the podcast. I want to, here at the end, I want to do 2 things, which I do every episode. The first is to thank you for sharing, not only because I get to hear about it, but also because there are people out there who get to be inspired by it and say, you know what? A lot of what this guy says makes a lot of sense, and I can recognize something in my own life. That takes some courage. It takes courage to say, hey, I could use help. And it takes generosity to share it with the world. So thank you for that. The second part is I want you to take a moment and I want you to think of 3 takeaways from our conversation here. 3 things you take with you, and then share them.
3 things that I'm taking away from our conversation right now.
Yes. Things you will think differently on, or things you disagree violently with, or things where you think, okay, I could try this, or that makes sense. Things that will stick with you in a couple of days.
Well, top of mind is designing more specific introductions to material that can be situated in different settings. So therefore, specific introductions to specific types of potential clients and people who would engage with what I have to offer, that would connect to them in a way that is more simply put, or I mean, and in a sense, simply put, but slightly amorphous, so that it doesn't create too specific a category boundary, like your Speak Like Obama or World Building is Brand Building. I mean, those are both, they're short, they're specific, but they're also open to more questions. And I think I think about workshops that involve creative thinking and, outside of the ordinary types of approaches and collaborations. But I think I need to design titles and log lines that are much more provocative without being exclusionary by discipline. So that's one strong takeaway. Another takeaway is, I don't know if this comes out of the conversation, which is to remain familiar with the to stay hungry within the space of always seeking connection, rather than assuming connection will, be fed by a steady stream like it does when the university sends you the next group of students who've registered for your course. Finding those students it's not about finding the students, it's about finding the decision makers and learning how to address, pivot, connect with their possible needs or curiosities. Because I think in a lot of ways, I don't know that everyone understands that their curiosities are coming from a need, but that's where I could be, the first part is more useful. And lastly, I guess if I have a third one, it's to think of myself more as a transmedial event, opening into people's potential employment, that I can actually take them, whereas I using the word generalist, but actually a multiple medium expert, or a person who can help design a systematic approach to generating lots of potential touch points for products. Like when you were talking about the shoe doesn't want to be a bicycle, I was thinking about how often in China I would think we were doing a show, but it turns out it was also potentially a reality TV show with merchandise, and could also spin off to like a summer camp using the same characters, and potentially so like the way of thinking of every creative act is potentially, itself re-emerging in a different medium, is kind of the kind of yogurt that I am.
And a very nice kind of yogurt it is.
Yeah, exactly.
If we take that and dive into that for a moment, and this is just me giving ideas, you can ignore them, of course, is that if I was you, David, and I went out tomorrow and said, you know what, who's David right now? Then Professor David Bassuk, transmedia strategist. And one of the things you offer, apart from consulting and speaking, is you do this training program called World Building is Brand Building. If you give people nothing more than that, professor, your name, transmedia strategist, you do keynote, you do teaching, and you do speaking, and you do consulting, and then you run this program called World Building is Brand Building. You think some people would say, yeah, I want that, because I do.
Yeah, that's really well put. I don't use the word strategist in any of my material. You earlier said creative strategist, which was quite good. And I think transmedial strategist, especially connected to that workshop, is double good to be.
There's at least, there might be something there, at least and if it doesn't work, you can always just do something else, right?
That's right.
With this, thank you to all of you listening in and being our flies on the wall for our conversation. This has been the Innovation Coaching Podcast. You've heard David Bassuk, Professor David Bassuk, and me, your host, definitely not Professor Klaus Westel. Thank you for listening.